Is Russia conducting a massive flanking maneuver in an effort to dislodge Ukraine from their defensive positions before aid arrives? But is it too late for Russia to stop the tide of munitions coming for them? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the most interesting and largest news from the front line, and you can see here, is this Russian advance along this rail line at Ocheretyne. And what is interesting about it is that you can see we've talked earlier about just why Russia's so dialed in on this particular town. The answer is when Russia took Avdiivka, the Ukrainians retreated to a defensive line in that's basically anchored by there's Berdaichi, but runs right along this river and reservoir system that runs kind of north-south. And the hillside here means that Ukraine occupies the high ground, and that Russia, in order to take these positions, at least with a frontal assault, is going to have to conduct a river crossing and then assault up a hill, right? It's very difficult. And we've seen a lot of video, Ukrainians relying on drones, a lot of drones, to absolutely buzzsaw any Russian forces that attempt to advance, right? They have to assemble under full view of the Ukrainian forces and then drive here, hopefully establish some sort of pontoon bridge or something, or cross at one of these very narrow crossing points that Ukraine almost certainly keeps under constant observation. Russia has found out the hard way that this isn't going to work. And so they've decided to go to the flanks. Well, they first tried to flank south here near this Umansky, but you can see that the river actually extends southward, and Ukraine maintained a pretty robust defense here, locking them in. And finally, the Russians realized that they were just going to advance into this much larger lake here. So finally, they realized that the only way to really get across this river was to go up and around. And the reason that they've done this is actually because they are desperate, really, to try to break apart this Ukrainian defensive line that they've held for a long time. And so in an effort to do this, they've followed this railway here. And what we've established, that Russia has established, is a really strong protocol for taking pieces of forested and urban areas, right? In open terrain, the Ukrainian drone operations are sophisticated enough that they will tear apart any Russian armored advance, right? Anything the Russians try to do to cross open terrain, they just can't get it done without the Ukrainians observing them and deploying drone attacks. But inside a forested area, right, because it has a lot of overhead cover, and because if you move, right, 10 feet forward in a forest, there's still cover, right? There's continuous cover. And so the Russians have identified that this route through this rail line into this Ocheretyne is a route, basically a covered and concealed route, kilometers long, that would allow them to conduct, they think, a flanking maneuver. And you can see here, since the 17th, Russia has been pushing, right, jumping from this forest into the town itself, and finally occupying kind of the heart of the town here. Right? Now, here's the problem for Russia, is that they're just delaying the inevitable. They still have to turn this flank and drive out the Ukrainians, right? And they have to do so by crossing open ground. That is kind of the big problem. And you notice that the longer Russia sits here, they've got Ukrainians to their north, south, and east. This is a really narrow band to have to fight in, right? So unless, as we've talked about, salients don't persist in this warfare. It is too tactically disadvantageous. And so the Russians, especially with this narrow salient here, they're going to have to either turn south and try to take Novobakhmutivka or Solovyova. They're going to have to expand this flank, or they're going to get driven back. For Ukrainians, I believe right now they're likely focusing on pinning them in place, just stopping the Russian forces from advancing, and preparing a more robust defense along these two towns, right? So that when Russia does decide to turn the flank, they are going to get torn up by a prepared Ukrainian defensive line. I think that's probably the plan. Again, but you can also see that there's not a ton of value here. And, there's still some debate as to what exactly we're going to see the Ukrainians do, right? Warmapper, for example, is actually speculating that they are going to fall back to this line to the west, right, near Novoselivka, Persha. And you can see here they think Warmapper speculates that they're going to use this river as a defensive line here. Do I think that? One, it's not the end of the world, because you can see all they're going to do is fall back across open ground. There's not going to be a town or a significant rail line or some kind of key line of control that Ukraine is going to yield. That said, this would be a lot of territory for Ukraine to willingly exchange, right? And I'm not convinced they will feel this is necessary. You can see here, right, they've identified this defensive line along this at Umansky. I am just not convinced. They think this breach is going to go somewhere. I'm a skeptic. I'm not going to sit there and say this isn't a defensive line. Ukraine is obviously preparing for contingencies all the time. But I really think that Russia's ability to break out of Ocheretyne and push south is overstated. Now, if you guys feel like you need a way to break out of your low energy, get the stuff done you need to get done, you guys know what I'm talking about. Strike gum, right? Strike gum, 90 milligrams of caffeine, every single piece, designed by me, manufactured right here in the USA using natural caffeine. This is meant to be the alternative to an energy drink, right? Each one of these pieces, 90 milligrams of caffeine, but a refreshing mint flavor. It doesn't taste like whatever weird stuff Amp Energy tastes like, or Red Bull, right? So it tastes great. 90 milligrams of caffeine, 100 milligrams of alpha GPC. Best of all, we're on Amazon now. So you can go to Amazon.com, search for Strike Gum Energy, or the links in the description, pick some up. But if you want the new member discounts, if you want the veteran and military discounts, you want to pick this up on StrikeGum.com. But thanks to the dozens and dozens of people who've left us reviews on Amazon, you know that these reviews make a huge difference for us. And we really appreciate you guys that have done it. So again, a huge thank you to everybody that's picked up some Strike Gum. Okay, so here's the other thing I wanted to talk about, is that Russia, the reason they're pushing so hard and that this tactic has this strategy seems to have some pretty big holes in it, is because the military aid to Ukraine, according to the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee chairperson, Mark Warner, said that ATACMS missiles could be in transit to Ukraine by the end of the week. And that's if the Senate passes the appropriations bill tomorrow, the 23rd, and Biden signs it on the 24th. Warner stated, of course, this was yesterday, that the administration has been prepared to provide long-range ATACMS to Ukraine as the bill specifies. They've been ready for several months. Using this U.S.-provided weaponry, Ukrainian forces have been able to destroy 87% of Russian, pre-existing ground forces. Okay. Yeah, those are the army that invaded. We've talked about this in earlier videos. The army that Russia compiled to invade Ukraine, 87% of those troops have been killed or wounded severely enough that they're out of the battlefield. And so now, Russia, here's what he's not acknowledging. Russia's replaced all those losses and then some. The Russian military is actually 15% larger. Even if they are more poorly trained, they are now much more experienced. So these weapons have been very effective at turning the Russian military, at eliminating the Russian military. But what they haven't been able to do, which frankly no one in modern history has been able to do, is stop Russia's ability to generate force. They're not good at producing highly sophisticated weapons, but they are so good at producing a minimum viable soldier, right? A poorly trained conscript with basic weapons. And producing them in an absolute eye-watering mass. Russia continues to be great at it. And if you want to beat them, you have to have weapons that can mow that grass, so to speak, as grisly as it is to think about. But that is what the aid package is going to enable Ukraine to do. They're going to give them much more effective weapons, and it's going to buy the European Union time to mobilize their own industrial base to help equip Ukraine. Now, Zelensky has said that U.S. military support gives Ukraine a shot at victory. We've talked about this in earlier videos, but Ukrainian battlefield progress depends on how fast the aid arrives. Delays in assistance, right, have already contributed to Ukrainian losses in several directions, like we just talked about. And the Ukrainian military really wants these air defense and long-range weapon systems because that is going to force Russia to push all of its personnel and logistics further from the front lines if they want to do any staging. Right now, they can get very close. They can pre-position their logistics. It's just a really tough. It's much easier for Russia to solve many of this battlefield's problems. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for you. Thank you so much to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, you really should. And of course, a huge thank you to everybody at combatvetnews.com. You should join over there too. See ya. Cheers.